3 times in the last 60 days, someone made a billion-dollar bet that oil prices were about to fall. 3 times, before 3 separate announcements. Each time, the bet paid off within hours. The first suspicious series of trades, worth $950 million, placed on falling oil prices on April 7th, shortly before a policy shift was announced by President Trump, a 2-week ceasefire with the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Hoodline. The second, 7,990 lots of Brent crude futures worth an estimated $750 million, sold 20 minutes before a statement by Iran's foreign minister announcing that the Strait of Hormuz was open for the rest of the ceasefire. Hoodline. The third suspicious series of bets, also placed shortly before a separate policy shift by Donald Trump. Hoodline. $3 billion trades, 3 policy announcements, 3 paydays. And while someone, or several someones, made fortunes knowing what was coming, the average American driver watched the price of a gallon of gas climb to $4. 39 this morning. That is a 9-cent increase in a single day and more than 30 cents higher than 1 week ago. iWeatherNet. Something is happening at the Strait of Hormuz that is draining your bank account, and someone knows about it before you do. Stay with me, because the gas price number is the headline. The ceasefire is the headline. The war is the headline. But inside this story, buried in the oil futures data, in the Dallas Fed's economic models, and the cargo ship tracking numbers from K. Peeler, there is a picture of what the next 6 months look like for the American economy that no single press conference has assembled in one place. A picture that includes one number from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas that should be on every front page in America and is not. We are going to get to that number. Stay with me. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles, the distance from Midtown Manhattan to JFK Airport. The distance from downtown Chicago to O'Hare. 21 miles of water between Iran and the Musandam Peninsula of Oman. And through those 21 miles, before February 28th of this year, about 3,000 vessels passed every month. Oil tankers carrying an estimated 15 million barrels per day of crude and other oil products, amounting to approximately 1/5 of the world's entire oil trade. 25% of the world's seaborne oil, 20% of its liquefied natural gas. WGCU, every tanker bound for Japan, every cargo ship carrying Qatari LNG to South Korea, every vessel supplying the refined products that Asia's economies run on, every barrel bound for China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Singapore, Taiwan, all of it, through 21 miles of water. On February 28, 2026, the United States launched Operation Epic Fury, an air and maritime campaign targeting Iranian command and control centers, IRGC headquarters, ballistic missile sites, Navy ships and submarines, anti-ship missile sites, air defense capabilities, and military airfields. The opening salvo took out Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Iran retaliated with hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones, and the Strait of Hormuz became a war zone, National Interagency Fire Center. In all of March 2026, just 154 vessels were recorded crossing the strait, down from approximately 3,000 per month before the war. Traffic through Hormuz has run at about 5% of the pre-war average for 2 straight months. WGCU 5%. Of 3,000 vessels per month, running through the artery that supplies 1/5 of the world's oil for 60 days. Now bring it home. As the war in Iran enters its 60th day, the national average for a gallon of regular gasoline has climbed to $4.39, a 9-cent increase in a single day and more than 30 cents higher than 1 week ago. iWeatherNet. The national average gas price is $1, 12 higher than it was at this time last year, according to ALDA. Oil prices have surged above $100 per barrel, with no indication of when the Strait of Hormuz will reopen. WGCU gas prices in Indiana rose 73 cents in a single week. Michigan, 71 cents. Ohio, 56 cents. Gas prices in those states are now at their highest level since summer 2022, approaching new all-time records, according to Patrick Dehan, head of petroleum analysis for GasBuddy. CBS News, California leads the nation at nearly $6 per gallon. Hawaii and Washington are both above $5.50. Diesel prices hover around $5. 46 per gallon nationally, adding compounding pressure to transportation and supply chain costs across the entire economy. The Watcher's diesel at $5. 46, every Amazon delivery, every grocery store truck, every FedEx package, every USPS parcel. Shipping services, including the United States Postal Service, Amazon, and FedEx, have implemented fuel surcharges. Jet fuel in North America has spiked 95% since the war began, causing multiple airlines to raise prices for checked baggage. National Interagency Fire Center, 95% jet fuel in 60 days. The family planning a summer vacation is not just paying more at the pump. They are paying more for the flight, more for the checked bag, more for the hotel shuttle, more for the rental car, more for the food that was trucked to the grocery store before the trip. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide, and it is inside every transaction in the American economy right now. Here's the detail that should stop you cold. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas published its economic model of what happens when the Strait of Hormuz closes. The numbers are clinical. A closure that removes close to 20% of global oil supplies from the market during the second quarter of 2026 is expected to raise the average West Texas intermediate price of oil to $98 per barrel and lower global real GDP growth by an annualized 9 percentage points in Q2 2026. Cuba headlines 9 percentage points of annualized global GDP growth. Gone. In one quarter, from one choke point. If the disruption persists for 3 quarters, through the summer refill season and into the fall, global real GDP growth falls 3 percentage points year over year. The level of real GDP remains below its pre-closure level even by year-end 2026 and below its initial level by year-end 2027. Cuba headlines. Below its pre-closure level at the end of 2027, not 2026, 2027. The economic shadow of a 21-mile choke point closed for 60 days extends 18 months into the future, even in the Dallas Fed's optimistic models. The head of the International Energy Agency described the situation as the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Cyber Cuba, the greatest in history. That phrase was used by the person whose job it is to assess global energy security challenges. It is not a political statement, it is a professional assessment. In the ceasefire that was supposed to end this, the deal agreed on April 8th that briefly opened the strait, briefly dropped oil prices 11%, briefly gave relief, collapsed within 24 hours. Here is the sequence that produced the 3 suspicious billion-dollar trades. After more than 5 weeks of fighting, the United States and Iran agreed on April 7th and 8th to a ceasefire that included Israel. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz would be possible via coordination with Iranian authorities. WGCU oil prices dropped 11% in the immediate aftermath. The next day, April 9th, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed that traffic through the strait had been halted again, following what it said was an Israeli ceasefire violation in Lebanon. The IRGC published a map showing alternative routes through the strait channeling traffic past Larak Island, enabling checks by the Iranian Navy, marking the previously standard IMO shipping corridor as a danger zone. WGCU, the official IMO shipping lane, the same lane that 3,000 vessels used every month before February 28th, designated a danger zone by the Revolutionary Guard of Iran. On April 12th, direct negotiations took place in Islamabad, Pakistan, between U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the highest level direct engagement between the United States and Iran since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Those talks failed. Washington reportedly proposed a 20-year pause on Iranian uranium enrichment. Iran rejected it, insisting on 5 years. The Watchers, 47 years of diplomatic silence, broken in Islamabad, failed in Islamabad. Following the failure of the Islamabad talks, Trump ordered the U.S. Navy to begin a blockade of the strait to prevent passage of ships transiting through Iranian ports. A senior Iranian military commander warned that if the U.S. continued its naval blockade, Iran's armed forces would not allow any exports or imports to continue in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Red Sea. The Watchers. Not just the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, the Red Sea, that is. Every maritime route that supplies the eastern half of the world with energy, all of it in one Iranian commander's warning. On April 17th, Iran declared the strait fully open to commercial shipping. Oil prices tumbled more than 10% in the immediate aftermath. By the following day, Tehran had reclaimed control of the choke point after Trump refused to end the U.S. naval blockade. WGCU open, closed, 3 times in 10 days. And each announcement, timed with billion-dollar oil futures, trades placed minutes before the market-moving news arrived. Here is what is not making headlines. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an oil route. The near-total halt of tanker traffic has caused a significant disruption in the global supply of sulfur, with Gulf countries accounting for roughly 45% of the global commodity, hoodline sulfur, the industrial feedstock for sulfuric acid, which is the most widely produced industrial chemical in the world, used in fertilizer production, battery manufacturing, petroleum refining, and chemical processing across every industrial sector. The Strait of Hormuz is also central to the global fertilizer trade. Over 30% of global urea, which is widely used and produced from natural gas, is exported from Gulf countries through the strait. Much of the cost of producing corn and wheat is in the cost of fertilizer, and this cost, along with rising energy costs, makes basic food production very expensive. Gear junkie corn, wheat, the two crops that feed more human beings than any other food source on Earth. The British think tank, the Food Policy Institute, has warned of long-term increases in food prices due to disruption in fuel and fertilizer markets. As of March, analysts feared that a hard oil crisis was unfolding, expected to be very decisive to the global economy. Gear junkie. Not a gas prices story, a food prices story. 60 days into a war that closed a 21-mile channel, the price of fertilizer used to grow American corn and wheat is rising because the natural gas that makes the fertilizer cannot leave the Gulf. Qatar Energy declared force majeure on its contracts with buyers. Internal sources told Reuters that Qatar would soon be shutting down its gas liquefaction operations as LNG tankers could not leave the Gulf, and that restarting the process would take weeks once the strait reopened. Hoodline force majeure. The legal declaration that a party cannot fulfill a contract due to circumstances beyond its control. Used by the state energy company of Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG exporters, to tell its contracted buyers, "We cannot deliver what we promised, and there is nothing we can do about it." The European Central Bank postponed its planned interest rate reductions, raising its 2026 inflation forecast and cutting GDP growth projections, warning that energy-intensive economies face high risks of technical recession if the maritime blockade persists through the summer refill season. European gas storage is at just 30% capacity, historically low, following a harsh 2025-2026 winter. UK inflation is expected to breach 5% in 2026. Hoodline. The OECD forecasts that U.S. inflation will reach 2% in 2026, 2 percentage points higher than previous projections, directly attributed to the conflict. Hoodline 4, 2% American inflation, driven by 21 miles of contested water. Now here's the number that should be on every front page in America. The strait still isn't flowing, and 13 million barrels a day of production remains shut in. We're losing it every single day this goes on, said analyst Daniel Johnston of the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs. The cumulative effect has already breached above 500 million barrels. The watchers, 500 million barrels already gone from the global supply chain. Not futures contracts, not speculative positions, physical barrels of oil that were produced or would have been produced that could not be shipped, that never reached their destination, that do not exist in any tank or refinery or pipeline anywhere on Earth right now because the ships that would have carried them turned around at the entrance to a 21-mile strait. Johnston warned that even an imminent deal announcement would not immediately unwind the damage. Even if we actually got the strait open, we would probably see another $10 to $20 for this barrel immediate route because of the speculative hot money. But then what? You still have to refill the pipelines, restock the refineries, rebuild the shipping schedules. The watchers. Restock the refineries, rebuild the shipping schedules. Commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is unlikely to return to pre-war levels immediately, even after a ceasefire. Ships need new insurance contracts. Crews need safety assurances. Port operators need confirmed security. Shipping companies need to believe the 21-mile danger zone designation by the IRGC has actually been rescinded before they route a $200 million oil tanker through it. WGCU. The strait does not reopen like a tap being turned. It reopens like a supply chain restarting after 60 days of shutdown, slowly, with lag time built into every step, with the price effects persisting for months after the military situation is resolved. Now zoom out to the geopolitical architecture that no single headline has assembled. Since April 13th, the United States and Iran have been running what analysts describe as a dual blockade. The U.S. Navy is blockading Iranian ports, preventing ships that have docked at Iranian ports from passing through the strait. Iran is controlling traffic through the main shipping lane and routing vessels through its own corridor near Larak Island, charging tolls of over $1 million per ship. WGCU, $1 million per ship, to pass through Iranian territorial waters in a 21-mile corridor. One ship paid $2 million to use Iran's channel. As of late April, payments were being assessed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Chinese yuan. WGCU, Chinese yuan. The currency of China, which has been the primary external party benefiting from this crisis, as it negotiates access to Gulf oil on terms that bypass dollar-denominated markets. Russia saw an average increase in oil revenue of approximately $150 million per day in March alone as global oil prices surged. Iran saw an average boost of $25 million per day in the same period. National Interagency Fire Center $150 million per day for Russia. From a war the United States is fighting to stop Iran's nuclear program and open a strait that supplies Asia, not the United States, whose domestic shale production insulates it more than most from Hormuz disruptions. The country most directly benefiting, financially, from 60 days of Strait of Hormuz disruption is the same country that invaded Ukraine in 2022, whose oil revenues financed that war, and whose tanks are still on Ukrainian soil today. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Gulf allies of the United States, have been forced to cut production amid shipping disruptions and threats from Iran. Iraq, whose oil and gas revenues represent 90% of the state budget, and whose imports of food, goods, and medicine come 90% through the Strait of Hormuz, is among the worst-hit economies in the world. Cuba headlines Iraq, the country the United States spent $2 trillion and 20 years establishing as a functioning state after 2003, cut off from 90% of its food, goods, and medicine imports by a strait that Iran controls and that the United States is simultaneously blockading. So ask yourself 3 questions. 3 suspicious series of trades on oil futures worth $950 million, $750 million, and an additional undisclosed amount were placed immediately before 3 separate geopolitical announcements about the Strait of Hormuz, each of which moved oil prices dramatically in the direction the trades had bet on. The trades have been documented. The timing has been documented. No regulatory authority has publicly announced an investigation. If someone is consistently positioning hundreds of millions of dollars in oil futures minutes before market-moving announcements about a war that is raising American gas prices 30 cents a week, who is watching? What is the legal framework for investigating trades made in international markets on geopolitical information? And why is this not the central financial scandal of the 2026 crisis? Hoodline. The Dallas Fed's economic model projects that if the Strait of Hormuz disruption persists for 3 quarters, through summer and into fall 2026, global real GDP falls. Row 1. 3 percentage points year over year, and U.S. economic output remains below its pre-closure level through the end of 2027. The ceasefire agreed on April 8th collapsed within 24 hours. The second round of negotiations in Islamabad failed. Iran rejected a 20-year uranium enrichment pause. The U.S. blockade of Iranian ports continues. The IRGC has designated the primary IMO shipping lane a danger zone. As of this morning, oil is above $100 per barrel with no indication of when the strait will reopen. If the Dallas Fed's 3-quarter scenario is not a hypothetical, but the current trajectory. What exactly is the government's public communication to 330 million Americans about what the next 18 months look like for their purchasing power, their mortgages, and their grocery bills? Cuba headlines. And if over 30% of global urea fertilizer is exported from Gulf countries through the Strait of Hormuz, and urea is a primary input cost for corn and wheat production, and the Food Policy Institute has warned of long-term food price increases from the disruption of fuel and fertilizer markets, and the summer growing season in the American Midwest that will determine the price of food at every American table in 2027 is being seeded right now with fertilizer purchased at the elevated prices of the current crisis. When does the gas price story become the grocery bill story? And who's going to explain to a family of 4 in Ohio, where gas rose 56 cents in 1 week, that the price of the bread they put on their table next year is also part of what a 21-mile strait in the Persian Gulf is costing them? Gear Junkie. Right now, as you read this, the national average price of a gallon of regular gasoline is $4.39. 9 cents higher than yesterday, 30 cents higher than 1 week ago, $1, 12 higher than this time last year. WeatherNet. 13 million barrels of oil per day remain shut in. The cumulative supply hole has already exceeded 500 million barrels. Even if the strait opens tomorrow, rebuilding the pipelines and restocking the refineries takes months. Cuba headlines. Qatar Energy's LNG liquefaction, shut down to prevent tankers from sailing into a war zone, takes weeks to restart once the all-clear is given. Gear Junkie European gas storage is at 30% capacity going into summer. UK inflation is headed for 5%. US inflation is projected at 4%. 2% by the OECD. The European Central Bank has already cut its growth forecasts. Economists are warning of stagflation and recession across energy-intensive economies if the disruption persists through the summer refill season. Hoodline. At a gas station in Indiana this morning, a driver paid 73 cents more per gallon than she paid last week. She does not know about the Islamabad talks. She does not know about the Larak Island shipping corridor. She does not know about the $950 million oil futures trade placed 20 minutes before a ceasefire announcement moved the market in exactly the direction that trade had bet. She knows her tank costs more than it did last week. She knows it cost more last week than the week before. She knows something is wrong, and nobody's explaining it in terms that connect what is happening at a 21-mile strait in the Persian Gulf to the number on the pump in front of her. The disruption is both rapid and unprecedented, said Dimitris Ampatsidis, Maritime Risk and Compliance Manager at Kepler, watching cargo ship data show 154 crossings in March, where 3,000 happened in February. WGCU rapid, unprecedented, already breached 500 million barrels of lost supply. Dallas Fed models showing the shadow extending to the end of 2027 and $3 billion trades, placed before 3 announcements, each one profitable within hours. Someone knows what is coming next. The driver in Indiana is still waiting to find out.